Please welcome Ryan Nolette, Security Operations Engineer and Cloud Response at AWS. John Miller, Head of Mandiant Intelligence Analysis at Google Cloud. Alon Schindel, VP of AI Threat Research at Wiz. Hosted by Crying Out Cloud host, Edin Kobe Naftali.
Hello. My name is Edin Kobe Naftali, and I am a product manager at Wiz, as well as the co-host of the Crying Out Cloud podcast. On the podcast, we fittingly remind everyone at the beginning of every episode that this is the place to laugh, cry, and reconsider all of your cloud security fears. So I think it's as good a time as ever to do that after Alon's amazing presentation.
Thank you.
Really, it never ceases to amaze me the inspiring work that Wiz Research is doing, and also how fast the threat landscape is evolving. So thank you, Alon. And Alon, in addition to being the VP of AI and Threat Research at Wiz, he is also the producer of the Crying Out Cloud podcast. So this is super exciting to get him from behind the scenes on stage. Okay, and now we have an amazing chance to digest and continue the conversation with our esteemed guests from GCP and AWS, John Miller and Ryan Nolette. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yay. Okay, so just so everyone knows a little bit about who you are, can you tell us a little bit about what your role is today?
Yeah, John Miller. I'm Director of Operations for Google Threat Intelligence Group, which recently brought together Mandiant Intelligence as well as Google's Threat Analysis Group, TAG. So we have a mission of applying threat intelligence to protect Google and our users and our customers from advanced threats. And my background personally is in building and scaling threat intelligence teams.
And I'm Ryan Nolette. I'm the technical lead for the Vulnerability Disclosure Program at AWS. Basically, I work with the people who go to the dark places on the internet, poke it with a stick, and see what crawls out. Those are the folks that report things to me. I'm also the co-author of AWS Detective and a bunch of the proactive defense tools and detection tools that AWS does.
Awesome. Okay, so there's a question we ask everyone who comes on the podcast to actually get to know them a little bit better. If you were a vulnerability, what type of vulnerability would you be?
I would not be an edge device vulnerability because I would be having a very busy year. So I think what I would be is zero-click remote code execution, because why settle for less?
Love it.
I put a lot of thought into this. So I think I'm going to go with zombie process, because I seem like I'm dead, but I consume a lot of resources.
Great answer. Alon, what are you?
I'll be a malicious model, I think, because I like fancy new things.
Yeah, he does. I know that for a fact. Okay, so now, serious questions. Let's start off where Alon left off. How AI is affecting the attack surface and changing attacker behavior. Alon went through it, how we see it from Wiz's perspective, but John, I'm curious how it looks from the Google vantage point. Also, as Google is incubating really cool AI security projects. How do you think AI is shaping the security landscape?
Where my mind goes with that question is, what do we see AI doing to how threat actors operate? And the short answer there is we see extensive and rapid change in how threat actors operate based on the availability of AI technology. And I think that's impacting the landscape for defenders in two really important ways. First of all, to just the level of interest that we see in underground communities, where nation state actors and criminal actors source their capabilities. We see a growing number of tools and capabilities that malicious actors sell to each other that are AI powered. Our team also took a look at what threat actor activity do we see attempting to use Gemini. And we saw a whole lot there as well. We saw threat actors from over 20 countries trying to use that one AI tool for capabilities really across the cycle of how threat actors operate. And so, given all that interest, what do we see actually happening to how threats manifest? And I think it comes down to two important changes. Number one, we see actors applying AI tooling to increase the variability of their operations. You called out just a minute ago, generating phishing content. We also see threat actors doing things like using AI to vary the commands that they execute in victim environments. And I think that's challenging defenders to up-level their focus on preventing classes of threats rather than individual instances of threats. And the second change I would say we see being driven is an increase in threat actors' ability to respond and adapt to challenges that they encounter in victim environments. We see threat actors leaning on AI to do things like learn about new technology that they encounter in environments and to generate new tools quickly for interacting with utilities that they encounter in victim environments. And so I think that connects back to, we heard earlier today quite a bit about the concept of addressing critical risks. More and more, defenders are in a race to solve those before attackers do, before attackers exploit them. And attackers' speed to exploiting those issues is being accelerated by AI.
Totally. And Ryan, you have another interesting viewpoint from another cloud provider, Amazon, and also from the response side. Have you seen a change in the number of incidents because of AI? And can you share promising mitigation strategies that you've already put into action?
Yeah. So I think there's a pretty common theme that everyone's really set up today, and that is speed and context are the two really big changes with the implementation of AI. From the defense side, like I get vulnerability reports sent to me, right? Now, just like the blue teams and everyone else here who's using AI to try and improve their life, their workflows, et cetera, so are threat actors and researchers, et cetera. So one of the big changes I got is called AI slop. Most of you probably have members of your team who use AI to generate their reports, so you know what I'm talking about. It's 10 pages to say two things. And where this really falls in as a big issue is that when you're accepting vulnerability reports, you have to treat everything as a valid issue until you prove it is not. And as nice as these reports look, it tells you nothing. And that is one of the big resource and time killers that you get because people are leveraging AI to make their reports look better, and it's taking human time away because you have to decode those reports. Additionally, when we do get those valid reports in building, so AWS is a team of builders. Our biggest focus is always on securing the customer. You've heard it a lot in our messaging. When things are found and we have to fix them, are we going to do some kind of vibe code, and are we going to do regular development? You have a senior look at it. How are you prioritizing the risk that has come in to be fixed? Is it a low enough risk that you could use AI just to fix it? Or do you want to give it to one of your senior developers to make sure it's done and done right the first time? And with the increase of AI usage, we're seeing that the human factor of deciding where in the loop the human goes in the AI workflow really depends on the severity of the risk, and it allows us to change prioritization and how we assess risks. And hopefully a bit later, we'll talk more about different types of vibe coding and ways to kind of improve the security around those. But those are two of the big things that we see. Also, you guys have probably seen in the news, there are now entire development teams that are AI bug hunters. We have worked with a few, very low fidelity so far in finding things successfully that are of any criticality. And I think that's going to change over the next couple of years. But vulnerability scanners started out like this as well, right? They look for the common things, the stuff everybody kind of knows to look for, but get missed sometimes by people in a rush. And as they mature, they're going to be more complex, and they're going to be looking at things besides just your supply chain.
Yeah, definitely. And so how are you using AI to help you and your teams, not just looking at AI as a threat?
Yeah, good question. First of all, we definitely are seeing many use cases where AI is really accelerating what our team can do, from being able to process large amounts of event data and tell our experts where they need to look closer, identify new malicious codes, generate detections, monitor underground communities where there's a lot of noisy activity. And I think a key question a lot of organizations are having to ask right now is, given just how much opportunity there is and how many different opportunities they hear about, how can they make sure that they're not missing the right opportunities, to apply those capabilities to their own organizations? And so I think it's really important to be able to step back and look at the area of security you're assessing and ask, what's a useful framework to be able to inventory the things that need to happen and think about where can I apply AI to those. And I'll give an example in the world of threat intelligence. So one framework for thinking about what has to happen in order to create threat intelligence would be three things: visibility, processing, and interpretation. Visibility would be, I have access to useful security data, for example, malicious emails. Processing would be, I use that to create useful standardized observations. For example, what malware did we see associated with malicious emails? And number three, interpretation would be, I use that to answer stakeholder questions like, how big a risk is this type of malware to our organization? And you can break down capabilities that way. And in that example, say, okay, visibility, the advent of MCP servers, is making it a lot easier for organizations to accelerate integration work for new data sources effectively. Processing, lots and lots of opportunities there because there's stereotypically so much security data that was below the threshold of what anyone can look at, and now an agentic workflow can look at it to at least some extent. The interpretation phase, we see probably the most need for a human in the loop because that's often the point where you're making a significant security decision, but still plenty of opportunity to accelerate workflows. So overall, being able to step back and look at capabilities through the lens of that type of framework is really important to make sure the organization is pursuing the right opportunities.
Human in the OODA loop. Right, for those who don't do a lot of security, OODA is a fighter jet or a dogfighting type thing that was invented for military a long time ago. Stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act, and it's a critical part of incident response and deciding fact. Thank you. There's 4 people clapping, which is surprising. And that was a really bad joke. All right, moving on to a couple other things that we're seeing with AI internally to try and improve things for us. As I said, I read a lot of reports. I also read a lot of content. Part of my group's or my team's role is being the CNA for Amazon and AWS. So we issue out security advisories, so CVEs, GHSAs, security bulletins, lots of written content. That all has to get generated. And a lot of it has to also go through content that researchers send us, blogs, presentations, things like that they'd like technical feedback on. How do we assess them at scale? So we've written things that allow us to consistently and repeatedly assess content for the same questions over and over and over. So very much like what you would have your analysts do, we're trying to write things with GenAI to do so. There's a couple of challenges that I've seen. So last week, I wrote my first ever completely independent MCP server for an application that I like. It has nothing to do with my work. After actually writing it and making sure it all worked, I then went and I tried to do a security review of it. So I used a bunch of different AI tools from various vendors to actually do security assessments against it. The biggest thing I found was inconsistency, even when you ask the question the same way in the same prompt. So it brought up, how do we improve that response? And as a lot of vendors are saying now, context, making your AI context aware so it's able to see all the information. So we have things like vector databases and RAG and all that kind of cool stuff. Each vendor, I believe, has a different name for it. But we're using that to improve the repeatability and accuracy Additionally, what I like to write in my Gen AI stuff when I'm assessing contents, tickets, entire engagements is that when it gives a response, that it gives a quote from where it found that answer and the exact text that was used to answer that question. So then we can score it for accuracy after the fact. Because a large part of using AI internally is scoring, right? How accurate was it? How do I improve it going forward? Thinking of the AI assistant as just a very junior analyst and training it the same way you would train a very junior analyst is how we've been trying to implement.
Yeah, for sure. And following the thread of AI, one of the things Alon talked about was like the singularity incident where AI and supply chain security cross over. What trends are you seeing in threats to supply chain security?
Well, we see a lot of opportunities for improvement, especially in supply chain management. We do see not just like particularly at AWS, but when you look at the open source offerings with LLM in general or AI in general, there's a lot of reuse of code. Like 3 people figured out how to do something and posted it on Stack Overflow, and everyone just copied it. So now when there's an issue there, it's not just an issue in one person's package, it's an issue in 30,000 packages because they all either copied the same function or they're using it as a dependency. So how do you go up the supply chain and get those things fixed for all the downstream people who really need it? And that's one of the areas our team looks at because we're trying to help the community secure itself. So finding who actually wrote this and like the top attribution person to get it patched so then everyone below it can inherit the patch and secure the community as a whole is one of our big goals.
I'd also call out one of the most important trends in supply chain threats that I'm seeing right now. Actually, one of the threat actors and campaigns that we heard called out a couple minutes ago, the UNC 5221 Rick Storm activity, I think is a really good illustration of this particular trend. So this is a sophisticated China Nexus actor. And what we've seen is this is an actor that historically has been tied to targeting technology companies in order to get insight into undisclosed vulnerabilities. The Brickstorm activity that we reported recently, we saw this actor engaging in campaigns that were notable for a couple reasons. In at least some of those cases, we saw, in at least some of the compromises that we saw, the threat actor was getting in by exploitation of edge devices. 2, in a lot of cases, it was difficult to tell how they got in because they'd been present in the environment for over a year before they were detected, which is kind of crazy. And 3rd, in a lot of those cases, they were targeting software as a service and other supply chain providers where they could get at potentially both sensitive data as well as, again, potentially insight into undisclosed vulnerabilities. And so what we see there is possibly a cycle of supply chain activity where supply chain incidents enable this attacker to continue to conduct more supply chain attacks. And I think, again, referencing back to the fact that these incidents involved compromise of edge devices, that really highlights the importance that we heard called out earlier of defenders being able to understand and get visibility and to address risks around these devices. This is a particular area where we see threat actors challenging defenders today, and there is a connection to supply chain threats.
And can I also just chime in that this is actually a really good topic with the supply chain because there's a big event coming up in December where AWS, GCP, and Azure are all combining with Wiz. It's a zero-day.cloud event where the targets that are in there, well, they're all dependencies that a bunch of the CSPs use. Why are we joining up to do this? To protect the shared customer. We all use these dependencies.
Yeah.
So let's put the money where our mouth is, right? And let's see where it goes.
Okay, on that note, and to wrap, in front of you are cloud security leaders, practitioners, teams, and given all the trends we've looked at in the current threatscape, if you had to give a one-liner piece of advice to these teams, what would it be?
I'm terrible with one-liners.
You can do a few lines.
Okay. Yeah, across the activity that we see, I think What stands out to us, there are a couple areas of opportunity that are really important for defenders right now. We heard a couple minutes ago that threat actors are increasingly tailoring their behavior to cloud assets. We absolutely do see that happening. And the areas where we see in breaches that we look at defenders having the most opportunity really come down to identity, integrations with on-premise, and visibility. Identity, attackers are focusing in on, how can they subvert getting credentials? How can they subvert multi-factor? Connection to on-premise. As an example, we have seen cases in which attackers targeted identity management solutions that were synchronized between on-premise and cloud and targeted the on-premise side of things as a way to get into the cloud environment. So taking a close look at connections back into on-premise is really critical. And then the third, visibility. Many organizations' approach to logging, they find just doesn't translate well when they're having to investigate a cloud incident. And so pursuing cloud-specific sources of visibility is really critical as well. So I would say those are some of the most important themes we see right now.
Good advice. Okay.
And visibility and accountability. If you can't see it, you can't account for it. So keep improving your visibility until you can answer the 3 basic questions of who did what and when.
Amazing.
And for me, I'd say another thing that in the vision space is eyes on the ball. I think that I agree with what you said, but we hear today, and especially now with AI, there's so much noise and there are new novel techniques that you see and you read about, but in the end, most of the real incidents that we see, they start from the areas that we already know, from data leaks, from the infrastructure. So even when there are new techniques, you always have to kind of stick to the frameworks and principles that you already have for your environments today, and think how you can extend them to these new type of novel threats.
Amazing. Thank you all, and thank you for listening to our live episode of the podcast. If you want to listen to more, you can on wherever you listen to your podcasts. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.